Welcome to the Real Life Buyer podcast. In this podcast, you will hear interviews with business owners, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, authors, and technical specialists in their field. These professionals will hasten your development, accelerate your career, and broaden your business know-how. Now, introducing your host, Dave Barr, interviewing with a purchasing twist.
Hello, and welcome to the Real Life Buyer. In this episode, I am delighted to welcome a master of selling. Included in his many career successes, Glenn Poulos is the co-founder, vice president, and general manager of Gap Wireless Inc., established in February 2007, and the founder and president of MMWave Technologies, launched in October 1991. And he's based out of Toronto in Canada. He's also a sales coach, speaker, and the award-winning author of Never Sit in the Lobby, 57 Winning Sales Factors to Grow a Business and Build a Career Selling. In this podcast, I'm keen to learn from Glenn his perspective on the important factors to be considered in the development of mutually beneficial relationships between a buyer and a seller. So without further ado, I welcome Glenn onto the podcast. Hi, Glenn.
Hi, Dave. How's it going? Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely fantastic. Delight to have you on the show. It's always great fun chatting to sales guys. I do it every day.
Right on. That's amazing.
None that are so you say, published as yourself, and clearly an absolute expert in your field. So obviously there's possibly some people who haven't heard of you in the audience, and we'd love to hear more about your highs and lows, you know, your journey that you've managed to build over many years to such a fantastic career in selling. Can you talk us through some of those highs and lows?
Sure. So I started selling in 1985, between 85 and 86. And I was actually a federal, we call it civil servant in Canada. I work for the federal government, and I was fixing electronic doodads for Environment Canada and traveling around parts of Canada, fixing things on weather stations and stuff, right? And my boss pulled me aside and said, you should be in sales. You're in the wrong job. And I was a young kid at the time. I didn't really question him too much on it. I actually took him at his word, and I started looking for jobs. And I applied for a technical sales job, and I ended up getting it. And I loved it. And, and I loved playing with all the new technology, and, every day brought something new, and, a new invention, a new box or whatever, something to sell that was state of the art. Right. And so I did that for a number of years. And then in 1991, I was on the cusp of turning 30, right? In May of 92, I would have been 30. And I had this burning desire to start a business before the age of 30. And I just really wanted to do it. And I realized that I'd seen other companies and competitors where they'd spun off pieces of the technology and created another sales company. From one sales company became two, and that the DNA just keeps splitting, and and then people would branch off. And so I offered the owners of the company to partner with me on this newfangled technology that was coming out. And I thought, this is the future, and let me focus on that piece of it. You do what you guys do, and I'll let you own part of it. I'll own part of it, and I'll meet my goal. And they said, oh, that's not going to work. And, you should just stick to your knitting, and, you're doing well in sales. And so, so what I did was the next day I resigned and went home to tell the wife of 6 days. I'd been married for 6 whole days at the time, that I'd quit my job, and had to pick her up off the floor. And she's like, what? And I'm like, don't worry, honey, it's going to be okay. And I started MMWave Technologies, right, that you mentioned. And the newfangled technology that it never went anywhere. It was the cell phone, right? And of course, nobody needs a cell phone these days, right? And that never went anywhere. And but yeah, so both of my companies were focused on that. And the MMWave was selling lots of bits and pieces and components and things into the wireless world, as well as instruments and measuring instruments. But running that company and selling it was definitely a high for me. And it was in 2005 I sold it, and in 2000, but the mistake I made with that company, which I'll readily admit nowadays, is that I sold it to a public company, and I didn't do a huge amount of due diligence on my buyer versus them doing diligence on me as the seller. And I took a stock deal from them, and I became a very happy multimillionaire overnight on this deal, right? But very little of it was in cash. And then I realized how public markets work and reverse takeovers and things like that. And they ended up, basically draining us of a lot of cash. And eventually they closed down our division. And eventually that public company that bought us ended up failing and the shares became worthless. And so I went from, not zero, but I went from here to a multimillionaire and right back down to zero again before I could sell a single share. And of course, I had given him my life's work in the process, right? So I had no job, no money, and no future, right? So what do? I either have to fill out a resume like I did for my first sales job, or start a new company. And so I started Gap Wireless, and the Gap is my name, Glenn Poulos, and I bought a vowel. I started with A, and I made the word Gap. And it came up with Gap Wireless, and was formulated with my partner from Montreal, Quebec. And we've ran it from February of 2007 until February of 2022. And we sold it to a U.S. private equity for all cash and no stock. And, so that was a much better deal, and we'd learned a lot. And, and again, we're still focused in the telecom space, primarily wireless telecom, but I still run the company to this day. They kept me on, and they bought some other companies, and I'm helping them to integrate them now into the Canadian entity. I'm running all the Canadian assets for them. And it's been quite a interesting transition going from owner with everything on the line, and your house pledged to the bank and all that, to being an employee with a boss who, wants to know what you're doing. And so, so there's lots of story behind that, but all in all, it's been great. And I think we picked a good time in 2022 to sell. And, and so now I'm part of a bigger, North American company, and seeing what the future is going to bring, I guess, in the next few years. So.
Wow, it's a fascinating story, highs and lows, certainly in that little lot. And you say you become an owner and now an employee per se, even though you're in the kind of the top job.
Yeah.
That must be quite difficult, I guess, mentally to get your head around.
Yeah, it's really tough actually, and because you like I mean, some people like having a boss, they like having people too, and I always enjoyed having my business partner, and we often leveraged off each other, and we obviously talk to each other on a daily basis running the business. But I mean, I'm kind of like this perpetual idea machine. And when you're an employee with hundreds of people in the company, and there's CEOs and COOs and whatever, it's a little bit harder to share all that stuff in a real-time basis, without coming across a little kooky, and you need to wait for the proper meeting. And I like to make changes quickly. I make decisions rapidly. And I talk a lot about decision making in my leadership discussions. But I mean, now I kind of have to check with them on most things that I do, and that's the part that it kind of gets you the wrong way. And not to say that they're bad to work for; they're all very nice people, and they don't get in your way, but there's still a step that you never had before. And meanwhile, before, you just pull the trigger, make the decision, and you live with the consequences, right? So. Wow. That's the biggest change. And
Fantastic. Well, really interesting to hear that. Now, you've written this latest book, Never Sit in the Lobby. That's a tremendous thing in itself. To write a book, it's incredible. Can you tell us about perhaps some of the highlights? What would a listener who picked up this book, what would they find in it? What would be the key messages? And would it be of benefit to a purchaser to read that same book?
So I would think it would be very applicable to purchasing people, because most of the book is how to what I call get, act, and stay in front of clients and be a pleasure to do business with always, right? And so, yes, the first part about it are some tips and techniques I use to get and act in front of customers. Like, how do I get in the lobby? And don't sit in the lobby, never sit in the lobby. It's the name of the title of the book, right? But I mean, very quickly, it turns to more of a different negotiations that I went through over the years. And you could put yourself in either seat of the buyer or the seller and see how they would react in these different scenarios, and how they could either be, let's say the buyer manipulating the seller manipulating the buyer, and kind of that whole persuasion thing, right? And I always try to present my topics in the book on a with an ethically sound kind of backing to it, right? Like ethical principles in order to move your case along and stay, front of mind or what have you, right? And so, like, one of the good things that there was a lady who represented sort of buyers I spoke to recently was asking me about something, and I was telling her my rule. It's in the book. It's called "I'd rather be last than second," right? And I was explaining, that when we're competing on a deal and we know we're going to lose, like there comes a point where you kind of know you're going to lose, and it is pretty much unequivocal. Like it's that sort of a point in the process. There's points where you're either you don't know or you're not sure, and then you're in the middle of it. Maybe you're having a bake off with the technology or something like that. But there comes a time where, hey, like maybe you visit them and you see there's 9 other things from the competitor and he's looking for a 10th one. And you realize that, hey, maybe you're just there to keep the CFO happy with multiple bids or something, right? And so I have this rule where the moment I realize that there's sort of it's more unequivocal that I'm not getting the business, then I return all my assets back to base, and I immediately go for one of their top customers where they're not looking and try to steal business from them, right? Because they're busy taking that order from me. They can't be in 2 places at one time. So why would I like fly in resources from the factory, dog and pony shows, dinners and golf games for people that aren't going to buy from me, trying to convince them when I already know I'm not getting the deal? And so the way I explain it to sort of the buyers is that, when you're portraying a situation, if it's not a level playing field, you may have to understand that you may not get the most from the other competitors if they're behaving in that way, right? They may be saving their dry powder for another customer where they have a better chance of winning. So, if you really want a level playing field, you need to provide a level playing field, right? And not to say that there isn't always one of them, but there are often times where they have corporate deals with people, and again, it's just sort of keeping that main guy honest. And as I like to say again in the book, that I can only keep the guy honest a number of times, then I won't be in business to keep him honest, and he'll be charging you whatever he wants because there'll be no one else to keep them honest, right? Yeah, you actually have to spread the business around, which is one of the messages I always try to share, that it's fine if you have a number 1, but at some point you do have to reward the number 2 with the business, and in order to keep their business healthy and ability to compete, right? And provide value and keep the competitor honest, right? Yeah. And just if I can just continue a little bit, there's second part of the rule is that I tell young salespeople, if you're working for sort of the number 3 or the number 4 company, you might not realize it when you take the job, but you usually realize it pretty quickly when you're in the field, right? And you realize, hey, like I almost never get in the order. This guy's getting 80%. This guy's getting 20%. I'm getting the scraps down at the bottom, which, based on Pareto principle of 80-20, it ends up being about 4% of the business that the also rans compete against, right? 3, the 4, the number 5, et cetera. And I said, look, if you find yourself in a job where you're number 3 or number 4, get the experience you need and quickly move up and change jobs. Like get a job with a better company with a better product, because your time in your life you only get one of them, right? And you might as well be representing the best at technology, or I'm a tech guy, so I always talk about technology, but you might as well be working for one of the better companies out there, because there's only so many hours in a day. And, you want to make sure you have a better than even chance applying your skills to something that the customers truly want. Right. And so, yeah, so that's quite a bit, quite a mouthful there, but those are some of the concepts that I share in the book.
You mentioned obviously the lovely word negotiations, and I've no doubt you've had probably thousands of negotiations and possibly amongst those some disagreements, I guess, as well.
Right.
Now, obviously, you've been on the other side of the table and you've seen how purchasing people, procurement people, supply chain, how they work, how they behave. And I guess you've seen a whole gambit of different behaviors, tactics, emotions. What advice would you give now talking to the procurement community when it comes to negotiating with salespeople? What's the best way? What are the things to do and not to do so you both achieve mutually beneficial agreement?
Right. So at the base level, in any negotiation, there's how do you behave in a negotiation, right? And so then I call upon the sort of base skills which I do go on and on about in the book quite a bit. These are important aspects to me of rapport building, and again, this whole being a pleasure to be around or to do business with, right? So I suggest that on both sides of the party, the buyer and the seller, that they should be applying techniques like active listening, right? And allowing the other party to fully, explain their situation, and rather than trying to cut them off, say, look, this is what I want, and just give me your best price or what have you, but to allow both sides to explain either what their challenges are, the customer, or, allow the vendor, to at least portray their product in its best light, and adopt a situation where effective communication can occur, right? And I find that that's best done through, like I said, active listening. And I have a really fun exercise in the book on active listening, because most people are a little bit they really kind of understand what it is, but not really. And actually practicing it is kind of it can be hard, right? Because really the easiest way to think of it is like when someone's talking and you're just dying to like jump in, right? And I mean, and really that's the worst thing you can do. And you're not even listening anymore. You're just kind of like formulating a response. Oh, but yeah, but and like, and the guy's saying, oh, but I need good delivery, and oh, delivery's amazing, and that kind of thing, right? And but the exercise that I offer, I suggest you try it with your significant other, right, your spouse or what have you, and try to bring up a scenario where you only respond to them with methods that I adopt in my active listening strategy, which is by responding by saying, oh, really? Oh my God, no way. What happened next? And how did that make you feel? Right. And there's a few other like choices in there, but they're all along that vein. You're never really saying anything to them. They're just like, oh, really? Oh, no way. What happened next? Oh my God, how did that make you feel? Like that kind of a thing, right? And then watch the reaction of the party who doesn't know you're doing it, right? And watch how happy they end up becoming as a result of the conversation. Because most of the time, no one really wants to, hear what you have to say. They need to talk and get their side out, right? And want to be heard. So yeah. I'm getting a little off track, sorry, but I'm very passionate about that. But also, patience and empathy, right? So I try to me, empathy is means that you can feel what a person is feeling, right? A lot of people say, oh yeah, I'm really I should practice empathy or whatever. And a lot of times what they really mean is sympathy, right? Which is more understanding what a person is feeling, right? And, or compassion, which is a willingness to relieve someone else's suffering, right? But empathy is very specific in that it means that you literally stop and transport yourself into that person's shoes to figure out and feel what they're feeling based on the impacts in their environment, right? And maybe their budgets are cut by 50% and they still need to get the same amount of materials out, or and I'm suggesting that the seller shows empathy towards the buyer, and the buyer shows empathy towards the seller in order to get the most out of either party, right? So those are super important to me, and at all times maintaining professionalism. And one of the biggest parts I find about negotiation as well is I have a chapter on it's called Freedom Begins with No. And again, both sides, right? Understanding when you need to apply the word no in a conversation professionally, with obviously with a smile on your face and being polite. But oftentimes I find some of our junior guys, a deal gets crafted, and then, somebody will want to slide in and get an extra 3 points, or, they weren't even involved in the negotiation. They don't even know perhaps maybe what went on behind the scenes. And then it's like, oh, we're going to need another 3 points in order to make this deal work. And they'll say, oh, well, let me go back to my boss and, see what I can do, or I need it delivered in 4 weeks instead of 12 weeks. Meanwhile, it's coming by boat, and that's where I try to coach people to say, look, you have to understand that that's the time where, when you say yes to something like that, then you shift a huge amount of burden onto your shoulders that doesn't really belong there. And that your freedom begins by saying no right on the spot. You're saying, look, like not only can I not deliver it in 4 weeks, but if I don't get the order into the factory before the end of this month, I won't make the boat shipment, next days, and will be another 4 weeks out. Right. And, and so it's important for, people to realize when they have to say, no, I've come in with my best price, but you're not really saying like, no, that's my best offer. It's more about the way you communicate it. But what's implied is the word no, right? And yeah. But the lesson I always want to teach people is that why is it freedom begins with no is because when you say yes, then you get this huge amount of work. You got to drive back to the office, ask the boss, explain why you didn't stick to the price that we'd agreed to, and et cetera, right?
Absolutely. Certainly the importance of being honest with these things. Don't overpromise and underdeliver, as we often say. And there's nothing more annoying as a buyer when you have what you believe is a commitment. People are saying yes in front of you, and then when they don't deliver, the person with the egg on the face is the buyer, and they'll remember that, obviously.
Yes, for sure.
So, that's right. And I love the fact you talk about active listening. That can be, as you say, very difficult, because quite rightly, you're mentioning that people are trying to think of the things they need to say the next sentence. So they're preparing themselves. Have you got any particular recommendations? I'm thinking here that when I have a conversation with a salesperson and I actively listen, I take notes. I write down key words. And then I always try to summarize what I believe I've been told back using those notes. Is that a tactic or a strategy you recommend? Do you have other recommendations? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So one sort of very common practice in active listening is the repeating back of what you've heard or what have you. But the tricky part about it is that I learned sort of in the trenches was, the mistake I made was that I was applying that sort of like parroting it throughout the conversation, and it comes annoying. It's super annoying to the customer, right? To the buyer, right? It's like, he says, well, delivery is going to be important to me. Okay, so delivery is going to be important to you, right? And then he's like, and we've got to stay within this budget. We've like, okay, so budgets are going to be, rather than when he says, we need to stay, within 4-week lead times or what have you, and you're like, okay, I understood, carry on, and then allow him to get it all out, and then at the end.
Yes.
So if I let me check back to my notes. I want to see if I captured it all correctly. You're looking for lead times in the 4-week range. Budgets are 25 to 50K. Based on performance and specs and what have you. Et cetera, et cetera. But not being this annoying chatterbox, which again is this whole interrupting them in the middle of their thoughts, and then they're like, "Oh, this dude's active listening me," and it becomes a negative at that point, right?
Yeah. No, I quite agree. There's the summary at the end. You rightly say you don't want to be consistently interrupted because you lose your flow as well. Yeah. And some of the points you may have been ready and prepared to transmit suddenly have dropped out of your head. And then, obviously, naturally, the conversations get rather difficult and challenging with that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Now, that's an interesting mistake that we just talked about, where people don't practice active listening. Do you come across other specific mistakes that procurement professionals mistake when they engage with salespeople, excuse me, that you'd like to talk about today?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so I guess one of the things that jumps out at me a lot of times is like what I would call insufficient research, if I can say it that way, where in a way they're not really prepared. I could think of examples maybe around cars or what have you. They're buying sort of the Ford, Chevy, Chrysler series of kind of a car, and they ask you in and you're more of a, Lexus or something, BMW, Audi kind of a, right? And they're not really, and they're expecting you to be performing at a different level. And they haven't really done the research in terms of the products you offer and where you fit. And so it becomes a very jilted negotiation because you're never going to get there from here, that kind of a thing. That's something that I come across a fair bit. One thing is like, not allowing the conversation to develop so that we can get clarity about the needs that the company has, right? Sort of like, quote me on this box is, and it better be cheap, right? Like, well, can I ask you a few? No questions, right? Like, and I'm exaggerating, of course, but I'm trying to, the sales professional needs to understand what the problems you're trying to solve are and get clarity around because there might be a range of products to offer, and so not allowing clarity to be developed I guess another mistake would be, sometimes see this in our company where we I call it sort of, just doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, right? Insanity. And impulsive buying, right? Where we just impulsively buy things without allowing, a competitor to come in and present an alternative way. Oh, we've always done it this way and it works fine. And I'm sorry, I'm not interested. And, don't bug me, right? So and I guess some of the other things that come up sometimes is in the area of the durability, the reliability, the warranty around the different levels of products that one offers or one is buying. Some things come with a 1-year warranty, some things come with a 10-year warranty, right? And there's reasons behind it, and I guess the only other thing I could sort of think of would be, not ensuring that enough multiple quotes are allowed, right? Like, I know this guy and this guy, I'm going to talk to them and then I'm happy, and these are mistakes from my perspective. I'm not saying for sure, like in the school of purchasing, that they're all valid, but they're mistakes I would like to work with buyers on to get a better shot at being able to at least present our offerings in their best light. Right. Yeah. And, and also this can be frustrating at times as well, as like understanding or setting proper budgets and having it be vague. It becomes difficult, becomes a bit of a moving target for the seller, right? Like, which product, which level of features do I include? So budgets can be important, and it's important that the customers have those set, the buyers have that set going into the negotiation.
Yeah. I love the fact that you particularly emphasized at the beginning, the preparedness.
Yeah.
That's something that I see that, well, particularly I find very frustrating when I find somebody who's coming in to talk to me about a particular product or service that we have a mutual interest in, and they haven't done their own research about what my company is, what we do, and how we work, and so on and so forth. Because I would spend the time on researching the company coming in. In fact, I wouldn't even entertain a meeting until I've done that research, because I want to make sure we don't waste each other's time. I think that's mutually really important. So it doesn't take too much time to do some homework, to go through the website, look through the catalog, have some conversations perhaps on the phone before we go to the cost of meeting in person.
Yeah.
So I love the fact that you say preparedness, because I find that all too common. People are not prepared, and it's just coming in for a sales pitch and a discussion and a chat.
Right. Yeah.
Without any goals, any objectives, without being clear on the specifications and so forth.
Yeah.
So that's brilliant. Thanks for sharing that one. Now, one thing that's quite important for all buyers and sellers is to build trust. Positive relationships between the two are critical. Quite often you won't have longevity in a relationship if you don't trust each other. You don't obviously work together. Can you share some of your thoughts, your strategies for both maintaining and developing relationships over the long term? Not just talking about a short-term sale, sign the contract, supply the products or services, but this is a long-term relationship. It's going to be over a number of years, perhaps 5, 10 years. How do you keep and maintain and develop those kinds of relationships?
Sure. Yeah. And there's lots of little stories that bring across a lot of these different points. I won't go into them all just for the sake of time, and the other nice thing about the book, shameless plug of the book, is that you can pick up the book anywhere and flip to a little rule and read it, over a course of a couple of minutes, and then come back to it at any point and flip to another page and learn something else that's new. And they're usually all sort of like, oh, I wish I had read that yesterday, or I can use that tomorrow, right? And but one of the things that I'm always talking to our guys about is being reliable, right? And so if you're going to be on time, right? Never sit in the lobby. When the guy comes out, be standing up, be ready. Don't be on your phone, chatting with the wife, be ready and waiting, right? I have another little rule that goes with that. Always have something in your hand and something in your mind, right? So something you want to talk to the guy about that's worth his time, and usually something to give him, either a quote or literature, or maybe a box of donuts if it's the morning, maybe a pen or a mouse pad, whatever you're giving away that month, that kind of a thing, right? Something in your hand, something in your mind, right? So the other things that I think are important for the trust and such is like honesty and transparency, right? And so, it's kind of that wishy-washy thing, like it's easy for people to imagine that in their mind with the wishy-washy sales guy and, the guy wants a discount or whatever. Again, and that's kind of tied into the freedom begins with no, like, oh, I'm going to need 10% off. They're like, oh, well, let me talk to the manager. And like, it's more like, well, that's not going to be within the realm of our pricing model. And, we typically work to, this kind of a scenario, and based on the company you work for, you should understand what those ranges are and be prepared to engage with them. Most of the kind of companies professional buyers are dealing with don't have a 30% swing in their pricing. Right. And, so being transparent about where you're at and being honest and, always the same story. Don't have different stories that are on every conversation, right? Being consistent in what how your approach, I already said reliability, but they always know what they're going to get with you. And, again, sort of being a good listener, that obviously helps. And then one of the most important things as well, I find is, a sense of portrayed confidentiality. So like, not like, oh, I was over at ABC Acme Distributing and they're doing the same thing as you are. And only they got a discombobulator in their facility and, whatever, right? They're basically spewing out competitive information. They're like, well, when he goes to that competitor about my company, what's he saying, right? Being like having an air about you where that confidentiality is pretty much accepted, offered, given, and will be continued at all times, right?
Yeah. Let me just touch on something you just mentioned there. One of the things that's often challenging between the two conversations is the talk about cost. Now, a buyer likes to understand, okay, what's the total price, but quite often will be seeking to understand the cost breakdown. And many, many times the salesperson won't want to offer a cost breakdown. What's your thoughts on cost breakdowns when they're asked for?
So can I ask, do you mean like the cost, meaning what's our profit margins and things like that?
Well,
or do you mean more on what makes up the total price, the service, the warranty,
Absolutely. There's a number of ways of breaking it down. If it's, let's say, a component, a widget, then you'll have your material, your labor, your overheads, and obviously profitability in there. And buyers obviously want to understand some of the key measures, the key factors that drive the cost, because there could be opportunities here where there's some confusion over material costing. One supplier is saying the material costs are much higher than another. And you want to get some validation. You perhaps want to tease out those areas that appear to be higher cost than they should be, and vice versa. So understanding the costs and how they're made up can be mutually beneficial. But it's also a point of contention. And it depends on the company as to how much they disclose or not disclose.
Yeah, we obviously there's some vagueness to what we do, because there's some level of confidentiality in companies and their magic or what have you. But our stuff, a lot of our stuff in the telecom is based on base metals, gold, silver, copper. And we have to be sort of upfront about some of those material costs. And we actually ask for a modulation based on copper price per pound, mainly copper, sometimes aluminum as well. And in some cases, maybe gold or silver, but mainly copper and aluminum. And so we're breaking out that we're kind of ahead of the game, because we kind of build that in so that we can tweak it if copper changes by a certain amount per pound. I wish I had a really good, not sure that I have a really good answer for you on that. In the distribution world, when we're buying products and reselling them, we're pretty transparent about it in the sense that we explain that in the food chain, we're buying them from around the world, transporting them by sea, air, rail, and truck. We're taking all those risks. And, for that, we typically enjoy a margin anywhere from 10 to 30%, depending upon the location, destination, and risk that we go into to bring these products to Canada or the US and sell them. And so we're pretty upfront about that. And, the other 70 to 80% of the product cost, we can weigh in on it, but we may not even know ourselves, right? Because typically in my career, I haven't worked for the manufacturer. I've worked more for distribution. And so I'm somewhat wondering what the cost breakdown is on some of these items as well, right? It's a lot of times I sometimes would say, I haven't said it recently, but I used to say, man, if I ever get reincarnated, I want to come back as a manufacturer instead of a distributor because their margins are so much better, right? And but the manufacturer has to pay for a lot of other things in the food chain after their gross margin, right? Distribution, advertising, warranty, support, and all that, right? So I know that's not the greatest answer, but
I know it's a difficult one, but that's why I asked it.
Yeah.
Sure. Now, another difficult one is quite often in relationships, there'll come a time for natural reasons quite often that the buyer and seller has run its course. There's perhaps been a change of product and there's a need to end the trade. Now, what's important, that I believe is important, is that you always want to, where possible, end these relationships in a professional way that leads to a positive experience, a mutual parting of friendship in some ways, but you're keeping that alight to rekindle at another time. So when you have to, or you've come across a point in your life where a relationship has come to the end of its time for now, what's your thoughts on the best way to break up, shall we say? What sort of things would you recommend people to do to maintain a future potential relationship?
Yeah. So really it's a culmination of all my 57 sort of rules in the book, which boil down to my main thesis, which is always be a pleasure to do business with. And there are many times where we're not the number one choice and you kind of know going in that you have a better than even chance of not getting the business, right? And so it's all about how you conduct yourself. And, many times, and I can give you lots of things what I do, but my approach and some of the reactions that I've gotten over the years is a lot of guys have said, like, you're our favorite sales guy and we hate it when we can't buy from you, right? Like, but they know, and I know, it's self-evident that this other solution was better, right? And so I'm not going to fight to the death. Like I said, I'd rather be last than second. The moment I realize I'm not getting the deal, I wish them the best, and I carry on and I follow up with them later for more business at a future time. And I don't go, oh, you bought that from that other guy. And, I don't do that kind of a thing, right? And even my competitors, I've often saw like this sparring between coworkers of mine and competitors, and like they can't even walk down the same hallway, right? They got to like take different routes, in case they get fisticuffs or something, right? And I always got along with my competitors. My competitors invited me in to do public speaking in their sales meetings because of some of the topics from the book and what have you. And I gladly did it. And, I'm friendly with a lot of my competitors, and the customers all, enjoy doing business with me. And half the time they don't buy from me, right? So that's just the way I approach it. So, I mean, the one of the golden rules in the book that I have, which is the title is "You Only Get Forever to Make Another Impression," and basically the story behind the rule is that you're always making an impression, regardless of whether you like it or not. So make a good one, because that's what's you're gonna leave the guy with, right? If your last taste on this deal is one of a sour grapes, and you storming off, and any bad words or anything like that, he probably won't even consider you for the next deal, right? I don't thank them for not buying from me, but I do thank them for their time, and I'm gracious, and I'm smart enough to realize, like I said, that while that guy's closing that deal, he's not going to be at the company next door. So I'm going to run over there and see if I can get that business while his back's turned, right? And there's some stories about me truly performing that and flying to places that most of my competitors won't go, and and how I was able to establish long-term relationships with different customers that were being ignored by the number one brand when I was the number two brand. And that's how I made my living, was scooping up all the stuff they ignored. Right. And I never really worked for the number one brand. We sell a few number one brands now in my company now, and they're awesome. But the margins are not as high as they are on the number two brand, because there's more work, right? So, you make more money with some of these other deals, right? So,
yeah, that's great. It's obviously, I quite agree that's critical to keep those relationships. You never know when they're going to come in use. People move from job to job, company to company, new opportunities arise. So why would you want to burn bridges before you start?
Right.
So
exactly.
quite agree. Yeah. Now, before I jump on to my final question, I'm sure people are very quizzical about what you do, your book, your social media. Where can people find out more about you, your company, and what you can offer with content and support?
So the easiest way for all that is to contact me on my website, glennpoulos.com. So GLENNPOULOS.com. And all the links to my social media there. There's articles and stuff that you can download on the website. But the best way to sort of interact and ask me a question or engage in any ways on LinkedIn. And I'm super, active on LinkedIn on a daily basis. I post daily and really engage there, and love talking to people from around the world. Happy to talk on any topics, and welcome the opportunity. So
fantastic. Now, question I'm asking people a fair bit at the moment, because it's so prevalent, particularly on social media, or in fact everywhere, is artificial intelligence. I'm keen to understand from a salesman's perspective how you view AI, what role you think it has with selling, and where do you think it's going for the future? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So on the level of, knowing nothing to being a total geek, 0 to 100, I'm at least 120 on the geek level of AI.
I thought you might be.
Yeah. I'm like a massive AI geek, and I'm on the cutting edge. And, we're implementing AI in all sorts of ways, like now looking at our emails and looking for keywords, going into our accounting system and bringing back information. Customer says, when is my product shipping? It sees those words and then goes and looks at the ship date that's confirmed. Is it confirmed? Yes. Comes back, rewrites the email to them, handles the entire transaction. So there's that kind of AI, right? There's all this graphical and video, audio to text audio, and all that AI stuff, which is incredible, but we don't use it too much in our business because we're not, graphic artists or whatever, but that stuff is really, really cool. Where the sales guy can really, really benefit from it is using things like Chat GPT or whatever to help them craft thoughtful messages. And you can use it, to form, authoritative messages, thoughtful messages, emotional, creative. Like you can craft your prompt to these AI requests, right? And the output in a certain way so that you get it, and then take it and craft it and make sure it's fully personalized, right? And so I get asked for a lot of written information for customers and vendors and the board of directors, and I use it for everything now. And what's the best way to to say this? What's the best way to ask for that? And just on a sort of a side, not really hobbies, that's not really the right way, but there's a very small company in Florida that I want to buy as a kind of a retirement project for down the road. And I'm not really an M&A guy. I did sell my company, but I'm not the mergers and acquisitions dude, right? And so I've been using AI to help me. How do you do that? And I literally have built this little songbook, and I'm now at the point now where I'm almost ready to make an offer on this company. It is a very small company. It's not that big of a deal, but it was more about all the steps involved and crafting all the documents for me. The non-disclosure agreement, the offer letter, the letter of intent, the share purchase agreement, all of it, I'm being able to craft through AI. And I'm just actually blown away at how much productivity, you can get out of these tools. But you have to add the human element in order for it to be truly powerful. If you just cut and paste it, people will know, and they'll quickly know soon enough that it was kind of like a chatbot thing that you used. But if you take it and then, and you add your personal voice to it, you can come across really, really well and thoughtfully, right? So my first experiment was writing an anniversary card to my wife.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it was kind of like our not our anniversary, but our meetiversity, if I call it that, like when we met, and that sort of like that day thing, right? And we celebrate that, right? And it's an odd number of years, and I'm like, what do I say? And so I just figured out a way of crafting this prompt to generate and I couldn't believe the response, right? And I picked, emotional, thoughtful kind of, response I wanted. And then I took that And then I just went to an online card making, website, pasted it in there, printed it on the color printer and folded it up and left it on my wife's desk in the morning. And when she got up, she goes, "Oh, I forgot to get you a card for our anniversary." Right. And I'm like, "Oh, I didn't forget you, honey." And she read it and she was like almost in tears over everything that it wrote. Right. I never actually told her that I used it. But, and I'm not saying, you should write all your wife's cards out on AI, but, the productivity that you get from it's incredible. That's all I want to say, and, but you need to be using it like a tool, like a hammer and a saw and a router and a chisel. And, it's like in the hands of an inexperienced user, you're going to get questionable results, right? And so the real benefit is when you're helping you to elevate your skill one more notch, right? But you've got that base level that you're feeding into it in terms of the prompts and tweaking the results, right? So
that's fantastic. It's great that I said it gives you lots of ideas and thoughts and impressions. What's the key though, as you both mentioned, is the way you craft it that becomes personal to you. So it may stimulate ideas, thoughts, but it isn't the exact words. It's your words that have, made it into something special. And clearly that was something that worked very well with your wife. So congratulations on that, shall we say. Well, it's been fascinating talking to you, Glenn. Thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed our conversation and hopefully we'll talk again sometime.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Dave.
Cheers. Take care.
Cheers. You too.
So there's another Real Life Buyer podcast. I do hope you enjoyed it and it's given you some ideas and inspiration for greater action and achievement. If you are a purchasing or a supply chain professional, business owner or director, come and join my Facebook group, the Purchasing and Supply Chain Community Hub, a safe place to engage with like-minded, friendly people. See you soon. Bye.